folks, this is sort of a self-referential segment here. Might even say self-indulgent, but we think it offers some teachable wisdom. As some of you guys know, Russell Dobular and myself were featured in The Guardian this week. The Guardian, which we teased out, we were interviewed for the newspaper about our take on AOC's sort of sunscreen hawking video. And so here we are. Here is the Guardian, fake news Guardian, failing Guardian. It's a failing paper.
It's failing. They were always asking me to subscribe. They were always telling me how many articles I read this year, and I don't care.
I don't care. I only read the ones that I'm in. That's the only time I read The Guardian is when they have something to say about me, and it's usually very bad because it's a fake paper. It's a failing paper. Nobody reads it anymore. No one tagged us, saying, "Hey, you're in The Guardian," because no one reads The Guardian. It's an irrelevant paper. No one reads it.
I said to somebody, "I'm in The Guardian." They said, "What's that?"
What's that? Yeah, right. They said, "What's that?" I had to remind them what it is. I didn't even remember myself until I got the email. I said, "Oh, yeah, that newspaper. Sunscreen socialism. AOC divides the left with call for better skincare options." So I'll read this until we're mentioned here. The burning debate on the American left this week is sunscreen socialist. It was sparked last Thursday when Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez spoke out about the poor quality of sun creams in the U.S. compared to elsewhere. Quote, "I was in South Korea earlier this year, and it is so clear how far advanced the rest of the world is on sunscreen, and we deserve better in the U.S., the Congresswoman said in a social media video filmed with Charlotte Palomino, a skincare brand CEO. Ocasio-Cortez said the FDA regulations on sunscreen, which haven't been updated since 1999, are needlessly blocking Americans' access to higher performance UV filters that can be found in other countries. It's not too corny. Please contact your member of Congress," Ocasio-Cortez instructed her viewers. "Ask them to break through some of the regulatory barriers at the FDA." The idea isn't particularly controversial among skincare experts. For years, dermatologists have pointed out the advanced ingredients in non-U.S. sun creams would provide better cancer protection than the ingredients that are allowed in the U.S. See, so already you could tell the slant of the piece. They're not on our side. They're not on our side, folks. Well, we are against pressuring the FDA, which is an esteemed democratic institution. We trust them fully and completely. I don't appreciate them peddling this misinformation.
Safe and effective. I'm just going to say, who knows? Maybe the person's crazy. But we did have a commenter on our original sunscreen video who was from Australia who said, no, because it's regulated as cosmetics. They got all kinds of shit in our sunscreen. You got aluminum chips. You don't know what's going on with it. So they seem to feel it was better that it's regulated as a drug.
Interesting.
That was their opinion.
Interesting.
I can't speak to the accuracy of random commenter on YouTube, but that's what they said.
But AOC's video touched off a surprisingly fiery reaction from some elements on the left who accused her of a pale imitation of the anti-capitalism she promised. On Monday, the Rhode Island chapter of the DSA torched Ocasio-Cortez, the DSA's most famous member, over the sunscreen video. A true tribune of the working class, the chapter wrote sarcastically on X, formerly known as Twitter. When the United Farm Workers Union replied in a comment that, quote, "protection from the sun is absolutely a working class issue," the Rhode Island DSA shot back, "Even if this is a workplace safety issue, her analysis is not socialist, but soccer mom consumerism, complete with her brand owner partner." The DSA chapter also reposted a meme by the left-wing podcast DueDissidence that said anyone who wasn't triggered by AOC's sunscreen video, was, quote, "not a leftist." Now that is not true.
Yeah,
that's
a misrepresentation.
That is a misrepresentation of our meme. I will put our meme up here once again, just so everybody can see it for themselves. What the meme says is, if this triggers you, meaning rich men north of Richmond, but this doesn't, then you're not a leftist. In other words, if you are trashing the song, but you're making excuses for the sunscreen hawking, then you're not a leftist. It's not a blanket statement. If you are not hot and bothered by AOC's video, then you're not really on the left. So that is a misrepresentation of what we said.
That's probably true too, but like the Libbyist literally posted a picture of herself posing with Hillary as a schoolgirl which means she went to the kind of school that Hillary would have been showing up at and posing for pictures with them, a very rich young lady that I know. She took exception to my posting that meme and came back about how much better the sunscreen is. So, yeah, if you're not triggered by it, you're probably not a leftist. I mean, fair enough. But that's not what the meme said. And he got into that in our interview. He brought up the United Farm Workers. And I said, yeah, you know, that's probably like the unions, where you hear from union leadership, it doesn't really represent what the members think. And even if that were the case, so why didn't she do that video with a farm worker? Nobody would have said anything if she had framed it that way. Why didn't she do it with a guy who works on roofs, a house painter? Nobody would have said shit if she had framed it that way, like, hey, these people are out in the sun all day. That's not what she did. She went and got a brand influencer.
Right. Well, and you said that to Wilford Chan, the so-called journalist who wrote this article. And, you know, in fairness to him, he did kind of include that perspective, just not from you, but from the Rhode Island DSA. They said, even so, this is not working class in its presentation. It's consumerism. It's sort of soccer momism, which was a way of making that point. So he did kind of get that perspective in there. But when we were doing the interview, he asked us a lot about the song, because the song was central to the meme. You know, you had these two viral things explode at the same time. One of them got a lot of ire from the left, this song. Yet I noticed not many lefties were, you know, going out of their way to criticize AOC. So my simple point was that if you're so bothered by the song, but not bothered by AOC doing the sunscreen thing, then yeah, I think that's a little suspicious. That's all. I'm not saying you had to, like, there are certain issues where when they come up, like, for instance, Russia-Ukraine. If you are not speaking out against the Ukraine war, you're not a leftist, right? That there's no context necessary there. Like, if you're not angry about how this is being handled, and you're not angry about our role, and you don't have an accurate assessment as to how this war got started and why, then I would say you're not a leftist. I wouldn't go as far as to say that with the AOC thing. Like, if you're not rage tweeting about AOC sunscreen, then you're a pussy. No, that's not where I'm coming from. If you're rage tweeting about Richmond, north of Richmond, but not about AOC, that's suspect. And that's the context that was important to my point that so-called journalist Wilford Chan conveniently glossed over. Or
failing journalist, Wilford Chan. Failing journalist.
Yeah, exactly.
And I'm just going to say, like, I'm not getting into it with people, but just keeping an eye on the conversation around Richmond. What's the name?
Richmond, north of Richmond.
No, Richmond, north of Richmond. Yeah, man. I'm gonna wind up having to make a why I left the left video over this, because what a bunch of fucking morons. What a bunch of idiots. Like, you got some people who get it. I think most of them are in our audience. But you've got so many people who they don't want to admit this. It is so broadly true of people who define themselves as left. They don't like his cultural signaling.
Right.
And they can't say that.
Right.
So they all find excuses for not liking it, right? Because they just don't like him and what he represents. They can't admit that, especially if they see themselves as leftist. This is just a Reaganite song. No, it fucking isn't.
No, it's not.
The guy has one verse that we consider misguided about welfare. That's it. The other 95% of that song is pure economic populism. And I gotta say, 90% of the comments I see from people, even people who consider themselves outside of the Democrats, leftists, they're all attacking this fucking song, man. You got maybe like 10% who see, wow, this is the wages of Clintonism. These people used to be the bedrock of the left. And now, what do you think, man? Where were they going to go? The people who went out of their way to express contempt for them, or towards the people who at least pretend to like them? And when they went to the people who pretend to like them, they picked up some Reaganism. And complaining about the taxes, I don't consider that right-wing either, because where are their taxes going? Where are they going? To Ukraine? Of course he's complaining about his taxes. The guy's got no health care. His kids can't get free education. You don't get any of the things you get in other Western countries for your taxes. So how is it right wing to complain about taxes that he doesn't get anything back for?
All right, so here is the point where Russell gets quoted. One of those disillusioned leftists is Russell Dobular, a Manhattan-based theater director and co-host of DueDissidence, the podcast that tweeted the attack on AOC's sunscreen advocacy. Were we the only podcast that attacked AOC's sunscreen advocacy? Back in 2018, he says, I went out and volunteered for her. I was arguing with the old ladies on the streets of Astoria, he says. But since then, he's grown bitter over AOC's closeness to Democrats like Joe Biden and Nancy Pelosi, as well as her failure to hold the line on issues like Medicare for All, the infrastructure bill, and the railroad strike. I would not campaign for this sunscreen AOC, he said. He now refuses to support Democrats or the DSA and prefers third-party candidates like Cornel West. So that was the only quote. I did not get quoted, which is fine by me. But,
look, man, you got to stop screaming "fuck the country" every time we do an interview.
Exactly. But, this is a situation where,
He's like, if only all of America had but one neck. Of course they didn't quote you. They can't put that in The Guardian.
No, I mean, he asked me a lot about the song and a lot about that, and I don't care that I didn't get quoted. That's not the issue. The issue is, it's something that, I've had happen before. We used to have a regional paper called the Times Herald Record come and review our plays back when I did theater. This was about, this was 15 years ago, and it was a fairly big paper, and they were really cool. They would come and review a show a week before it opened. And then, back then, the paper had a lot of circulation. Those were like the very end of the analog days. So like that paper had, as of 2018, a circulation of about 20,000. It was probably at least double that 10 years prior to that. And it worked. When they printed the review of the play, we would make sure that day we had people in the theater manning the phones, and we would take reservations over the phone. So they were great. We never made a big deal out of it because they were doing us a great favor, and it's fairly benign, right, when you're writing about a play. But you would notice quotes get misinterpreted or context get lost. Like it happens all the time. Russell, you were talking about how this happened to you.
Yeah. So this is, this might be the first time I ever got interviewed, actually. So I was producing a play when I was going to school in Albany. I was basically, the way I was working it in those days, I would take my student loan money at the beginning of the semester and I would finance a production with it, and then I would take the money back from the box office. So I had a good little money laundering scheme there. I was using my federal loans to finance my theater work. But I produced a play that actually got made into a movie. Unidentified Human Remains and the True Nature of Love was the name of it. It was a Canadian play. And it had been written at a time in the AIDS crisis when they still thought that maybe you could get AIDS from touching someone with AIDS. And so I cut that. And so I told the interviewer, I cut the stuff about AIDS because it was written when we didn't know as much, so it would play as silly now if you put that on stage. And I was quoted as saying I cut the AIDS stuff because it was silly.
Right. Exactly.
Which, Jesus Christ, if you had an equivalent misquote today, you'd be canceled.
Oh, right, of course, yeah,
like a comparably socially charged quote like that today, you'd be in a lot of trouble. That shit would go viral.
Yeah, no, exactly, and so it's a thing where like the closer you are to a story, like I feel like whenever you know more about a particular story than the journalist who's writing about it, you notice a ton of errors. That's why you always have to read media with a very, very critical eye. We're not saying don't read media, don't read the news, don't watch the news, right? But you also have to always have to look at it critically, because almost every time when I've been involved in something that gets reported on, I can point to numerous errors or misinterpretations or missing context or incorrect context in the piece. And this is just another example of that. Yeah. Obviously, it was cool to be featured in the paper, but it's just one more example of that.
I mean, with the quote of me, because he did mention why I was disillusioned, in terms of the realities of trying to write a piece and include relevant information. And I don't feel like I was misrepresented. The meme was misrepresented, sure. And the overall slant of the piece, which again, I mean, that's dealer's choice. That's up to the writer. Whenever you read a piece and it closes out with a quote that strongly represents a particular point of view in a oppositional debate, you can tell where the writer's sympathies are. The writer is telling you where their sympathies are. And he closed out with a quote that was very sympathetic to AOC's sunscreen activism. So, right. I mean, the whole piece, I think, kind of favors her side of it. It makes the people who aren't on board with it look like they're crazy or they're,
or nitpicking or doing this for its own sake, getting angry for anger's sake, right? Performative, right? It definitely, yes, I definitely sensed a point of view that was not ours. But we made The Guardian, folks. That was our mainstream media debut appearance, our MSM debut in The Guardian.
Please clap.